You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Peter Gostev, and I'm your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Peter, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm really happy to have you on the show today. I've been following you along for the last couple of months where you've sort of grown to prominence on LinkedIn, at least with your LLM expertise. And you're one of those that I actually follow because I think you're saying you're very on point with the models and how you evaluate them and test them and stress test them. And it just seems very, what do you call it, honest and straightforward. So I'm just really, really happy that you took the time today to be with me on The Only Constant.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Peter, how imperative is it actually, in your opinion, right now for modern business professionals to follow along in the tech news?
So I think I've got kind of two answers. There's something that I think is a good idea, and maybe I do the opposite. So I follow everything. I read everything obsessively, and it's not just the news, and it's also, I think, just seeing what my peers do. And I think that's probably maybe almost like the more important part of it, because even if we don't have any AI news for the next year, I think there's still going to be a lot of new ideas that actually people test out this opportunity or found a new way to mess with the models here, or someone implemented something interesting. So I think that's definitely a big part of it. But there's another answer is that I think there are only few things that really matter. And actually, if you do read the news a lot, you have to filter out what's not really important. And it's hard to say, right? We don't know in advance what's important, what's not important. But I would say generally, if you were to read, here's a summary of all the things happened that week, probably 95% of it doesn't really matter at all. It might be like slight improvement on the benchmark here or new feature there, and it probably doesn't matter. So I would say it kind of depends. If you're really into it, then it's I think you'll benefit from reading everything. But if you're a busy person and you just want to keep to the what's most important, I'll probably just look at what the big labs are doing. So yeah, if Anthropic release a new model, Google release a new model, OpenAI release a new model, I think that's important. Beyond that is just kind of what breaks through. I think it's unlikely that we're gonna just some really important stuff just not gonna make it beyond the niche news. So yeah, but I personally read everything, so I'm not sure I should be giving advice people not to read as much.
No, but I think that there's a couple of things here, right, in what you're saying, and I actually like that about you as well. That, like I just said, that there's this thing growing on LinkedIn where people are just sharing all the news, so just scraping it and then just sharing it. And it almost seems like this could be generated by AI. This is like a task for AI to do this news, right, about what's going on. But what you're saying is more like follow along on the dev days or something like that, the big announcements. Is that what business professionals should do? Because it really doesn't matter this or that, benchmark test for most, an HR person shouldn't really care, right?
Yeah, and I think the way I try to go about reading the news is I try to have a kind of a model of the world in my mind. So models are getting better, models are getting cheaper, and then these are probably while they're news, they're not really unexpected news. So if someone's going to drop a price next week, that just fits in with the model of the world that I have. So I think that's kind of okay. And then you just look out for what maybe breaks the model of the world a little bit. So, for example, what broke the model of the world for me is that at the beginning of the year, I really didn't think that AI video is going to be anything. But it really just, I was so wrong on that I don't think I ever wrote about it, but in my mind, I didn't think it was going to be anything. But it's actually a big deal. Like, we had Sora, which never got released. I don't think it
Mm.
probably ever will be released, but others really came in. I think Sora inspired a lot of activity, and then others came in and really innovated in that space. Um, yeah, so I think that's probably kind of the pattern I have. I just try to have in my mind what I expect, and then if something deviates, then that's important.
I think that's a really good way of doing it. I always say that, when I used to study at university, I saw these people always taking every note, right, writing down everything the professor
Mm.
said, right, and I was like, no, I only write things down if he surprises me. So you
Mm.
have to trust. I would say trust your intellect, right?
Yeah.
Trust that you will know what's important, and then only write that down. And you're sort of doing the same to some extent, right? To some degree, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, if it surprises you, note it down. Yeah, and yeah, so,
System two kind of
yeah.
things, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like, and some things do really surprise me. And you don't know what are the labs working on. I know, like context caching, or like 1 million context window from Google. Like these kinds
Yeah,
of things that, like, especially the context windows, like you kind of deal with, like, here's 8K, or maybe there's like, I don't know, what did we get, like 32 or
yeah,
64. We kind of were dealing with this, and here's a million, and just
yeah.
and by the way,
And
you
then
can
two
throw
months
in a
later, you
digit.
get 2 million now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and yeah, and things like this is like, yeah, they kind of break your view of the world a little bit. Um, but then I guess what I still, maybe as a follow-on, apart from reading the news, I think actually trying this stuff is really important.
mm,
I would say it's like, I think there's a really big difference with AI now, is that I think for most of the time, any kind of new tech was actually quite hard to try.
mm.
You, I don't know, you had to buy a VR headset, or you had
Yeah,
to, I don't know, like maybe have a relationship with this B2B business, and then maybe you can
yeah,
try something. It's just like you can't really try it, so you have to just trust, or just ignore. But here, I think you can pretty much try everything, more or less. Not
yeah,
everything gets released, but like 2 million context window, like you can set up an account at Studio and
yeah.
just try it. And like I do it, and I just once in a while test to see how I think it does it. And then you just, any new thing comes out, you try it and see for yourself. I think that's such a big change to everything. And I think that's probably also a good filter to news, that there would be a lot of news, and sometimes you hear, oh, here's a new model architecture and it's amazing, it's going to change everything, and you like try it. I was like, oh no, that's actually pretty bad. So
Mm.
and it doesn't mean it's not going to be good at some point, but you kind of, you calibrate the news as well to what you actually see with your own eyes.
But is this a democratic thing, right? Putting everything out there to try. I used to say that it's kind of democratic that everyone has access to the same models, right? There's no one who has a better model than you,
Mm.
uh, almost, right? Of course, they have something they're testing on the internal side before they just release it quickly, but it's really quickly getting out there. Like with an iPhone, no one can have a better iPhone than anyone else. Elon Musk
Mm.
can't buy a better iPhone than I can buy. So there's something democratic there, or is it more something that just keeps the hype going? Do you think, if you look at it in a broader term, that you can have, then suddenly you have all these people on LinkedIn going, oh, here's the news, here's the news, here's the news, and it's not really news that's relevant. It's just everything's out there to try to sort of grab some news. It's just, is it attention grabbing, Peter?
I'm
You love it, of course,
I
right,
feel
from an engineering perspective, right? But is it
yeah.
this is more about attention grabbing? Do you think?
Yeah, I think there is definitely some of that, but I also feel like we are not helping the situation, just in terms of just people who consume this stuff. Because I see sometimes, for example, OpenAI was updating a model, just a small iteration. They just posted it on like a, just I think on like dev account, or it's like, here's a new
Mm,
model, and then people start hyping it and saying, oh my gosh, oh, it's amazing, or they inflate the expectation and say, oh, actually no, it's rubbish. But like
mm,
OpenAI never said it was amazing. They just said, here's a new version, like we tweaked it. So I think sometimes also, I think people get overexcited, and I think maybe that is a kind of point that they expect. They read everything and they hype it up in their minds, and I
mm,
think you're just setting yourself for disappointment in that way. I think the reality is that these. the cycles to build new models, like properly new models that actually make a difference, are quite long. And
Mm,
one of the big things that I've come to learn last like year or two is that it's really kind of all about compute and
mm,
scaling compute, and the compute doesn't just kind of sit there. Like for us, maybe small consumers of the cloud, you can always just get another CPU, GPU. But for big labs, they don't have that because I need, I don't know, extra 200,000
mm.
GPUs. And you don't just get that. You actually need to physically build it. You need to debug it, do all the interconnects and so on. So they operate on a different kind of scale. So actually, for big progress to be made, you need probably 18 months from like between cycles.
Oh, but that's also, Peter. That brings me back to your video prediction, right? That was probably wrong, right? There must have been the same feeling you had about the video generation, why it wouldn't come to anything, because you thought it required too much compute, right?
Yeah, video. I don't think I've got a very good sense for like video and image models. So I think the intuition is a little bit like, surely language is just kind of words and letters and like small tokens. So
Yeah,
that feels like that's like should be easier. And then the image models and MMB video as well, that's like so high fidelity, should be much more difficult, right? It should be harder. It should have like a lot more compute and so
and
on.
a lot more expensive as well, right?
Yeah, but then it's like maybe that's not quite true, because actually to have like good words, maybe you need to like know the whole world and have like something that is like super, or like really quite intelligent. So actually it takes a lot of time and money to build that. But actually with an image, and there are some very small, very quick image generation tools now, where the open source model, Flux, Schnell model, you
Mm,
can generate a nice little image in like quarter of a second. So it's
mm,
clearly quite efficient actually to do it. And maybe it's also the same for video, where it's actually like maybe it's not as intensive as we might think. That actually, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit better, a little bit easier to scale. But
Maybe
I
it's
don't
easier
know.
because it
Um,
doesn't, with an LLM, it keeps reiterating. Whenever it adds a word, it has to ask itself again for the
hmm.
entire context. Where, an image maybe just asks itself once, and then it knows the pixels. Maybe that is that? I don't know. I'm not building these models. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what's the kind of intuition to have there, but I think it's just surprising. I think it, at least maybe to humans, it's a little bit surprising because just the way it looks, it's just kind of instinctually you'd expect something high fidelity to require a lot more compute to
Mm,
train and like feels more impressive versus just some words. But actually, good words are maybe just like a lot harder. So
mm.
that's but I'm not sure what's a good analogy there. Yeah, just something that's I think a little bit surprising.
And I'd also like, Peter, you said in the beginning here that you have a model of the world in your mind.
Hmm.
Please explain the model of the world.
Model of the world. Yeah, that's maybe we need AIs to have that as well. Yeah, it's maybe not, maybe it's like a little bit grand to say model of the world, but it's just you kind of try to put some axioms in place, where not like as strong of a word maybe as axiom, but just some kind of big trends in mind, as such as models will keep getting cheaper. We need a lot more scale to get models
Mm,
working better. Then with like O1, for example, models by OpenAI, you realize, well, actually, maybe it's not just the training scale, but it's also the inference scale. Um, so you kind of got these kind of building blocks in your mind
mm,
as you kind of learn about this space more, what matters, and then you kind of go from there. And then whenever I write or think about something, it's quite often actually doesn't take me that long to come up with the new thing to write, or actually I don't know, create a new visualization, because hopefully it comes from that model of the world and hopefully it's
mm,
correct. Um, and yeah, I'm quite visual as well, so that's why I like putting pictures together. And sometimes when you go through the process of also creating visualization, then it's really just cements that in my mind. Like there was one which I think went down really well, and I was quite happy to put it together. Was a visualization of how there are kind of two cycles for model scaling, where we've got kind of the big cycles where we've got the new generation of models, such as you go from GPT-3 to GPT-4 to GPT-5, and these are kind of the big scaling cycles. But actually, in between, you've got optimization cycles where
Mm.
you actually optimize and you make small models smaller and more efficient. So whenever, so between GPT-4 original one and now, we had need to count how many versions, but like we had GPT-4 Turbo, we had GPT-4o, like multiple versions of GPT-4o. We also
Mm.
have GPT-4 Mini. I guess, yeah, one is different, but the point there is that sometimes people would look at it and say, "Oh, GPT-4o is not much better than GPT-4. So, like, what's happened to scaling, right? We are told that
Mm.
scaling is actually going to change everything, and like, it's not that much better. But the answer is that it's not. We haven't done scaling yet. Like, it's smaller scale. We have actually optimized it. So actually, the way to look at scaling and test your hypothesis whether scaling works or not is that you need to go from GPT-3 level to GPT-4 level to GPT-5 level. But the interim ones is not it's not proving either way whether scaling works or not. It's just a different cycle. And I think
Mm.
I know obviously it doesn't help that I'm explaining the picture with words, and my point is that pictures are a good way to explain things. But the
Mhm.
point there is that I think it really just visualizing that really, I think, made the difference for people the way they kind of thought about it. I hope, but certainly helped me. So I kind of had this as intuition behind, um, in my mind, but I never put it on paper. And like once you put it, it's like, oh yeah, that's how I think about. That's my little model of this bit of the world of how I should
Yeah,
think
that's
about the
like what you
model.
say. If you can draw it, you can do it, right? So if you can draw it and put it together, then so oh, now it makes sense, right? But if you can't draw it, maybe it doesn't connect, right? So that's why you were happy, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me it works like that. Like that's how I like it. I know maybe for some other people they want to write like half a book on things like that, and that's how they think, which is I think is reasonable as well. So there's probably different ways, but for me, I like really distilling my thoughts into like a diagram. That's how I
Nice.
like to
Yeah.
think.
That's also what's working really, really well for you on LinkedIn as well, right? You're doing some great work with that. I really
Yeah.
think it's brilliant. Must mean that you have quite a nice model of the world in your mind, Peter, and that's quite nice as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and then I also that's a kind of my motivation for writing is not necessarily just I don't know to like teach someone. It's I think it's maybe like a little bit arrogant to think like how much I can teach people or like I don't know explain things, but it's just I just also like to sit down and have an excuse to like actually do a bit more work to just think about that a bit harder rather than
Mm.
just have intuitions at the back of my mind. And actually, yeah, once you actually put it on paper and you realize, oh, actually, like it doesn't quite fit together, so maybe I should change the way I think about this a little bit. So that happens quite often. So that's a motivation for me to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, some extent, if you have this success while posting to many people, it's not arrogance. It's actually because you're brilliant. That's just what I want to say to you, right? You must be delivering something that's actually brilliant, and there's no arrogance in that at all. If people resonate with it, right? That's the nice thing. That's the nice thing. Any nice thing about
Mm.
SoMe is that you don't. I also said that about pop music. There's an inherent value to popular music because it resonates with so many people,
Mm.
and trying to figure out what is it that resonates is interesting because it reflects something about how we think, and that's also why I try to say that your model of the world must be something that mirrors the model of the world that other people have. But what are some of the? I wanted to ask you also when I said your model of the world. I want to know what are some of the axioms that you have then, Peter? Because one of the ones I used to have always was, you need to know what you're doing before you automate it. And then, when ChatGPT arrived, I was in November 22. I was a little bit I was a little bit unsure about my
Mm.
my central axiom here that you need to understand, because I'm like, okay, maybe this can actually just do shit that I don't know about. But I've sort of reverted back to it again. So that's really nice, going back to basics. Okay, no, I was right all along. But what are your axioms, and which ones have been most challenged?
Yeah, I think I never wrote them down, so I don't know how much mine's are gonna make sense. But yeah, maybe I should write them down. But I think there are some. There's probably a category of axioms of how the market kind of develops, so where it goes. So what I mentioned about like models scaling, models getting better
Mm,
all the time, models getting cheaper, and the implication of that like, that when you start thinking about a use case and it might be too expensive or doesn't quite work very well, but to be honest, by the time you're actually going to try to deploy it or get past the initial stages, they're probably going to be a cheaper and better model. So you might as well like build it and assume that things will change. And we literally had this one example where we were in the middle of getting close to production, and then GPT-4 Mini came out. And actually, we just like, actually, you know what? Let's take just a few days to just replace GPT 3.5 with GPT-4 Mini. And then we had GPT-4 Mini fine tuning come out. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe you should try that. And to be honest, I think that was good decision. We did it mostly for learning, but it was good decision actually because it probably future proofed it. But the point there is that the kind of the overarching axiom is that the things will get better and cheaper, and we should try as much as we can just build with that assumption in mind and not optimize like too soon. Right? There's not going to be, and optimizations also include a lot of engineering work typically.
mm.
So if you burn a lot of engineering time on building scaffolding workarounds on something, and then just new model comes out and you just wasted a lot of the time.
But what you're just talking about is, I have so many comments on this. So sorry, I'm
Mm.
interrupting you here, but
Mm.
this is what I've also called tech deflation, right? That technology comes so fast that you don't even get to implement it before there's something new, and
Mm.
some people just say, oh, let's just wait, and then they'll be waiting forever and become Germany, right? But no, that's a joke. But to some extent, right? Then there's all this deflationary waiting all the time, right? But also that when we have 10x innovation moving, right? Things are moving so fast that this gulf between users and technology is just growing, growing, growing. And if you are sitting as engineer trying to solve a challenge that business has by putting something in production, but you're saying, no, let's just wait for new, let's just do that, let's just do, you never solve the problems, and the gulf just gets bigger, right? Do you get my point? So we're not matching it, we're
Yeah.
just moving with the speed of tech, and the business is just left over here on the other, side of the tracks.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think that that's probably something we should be careful with. I think what I have maybe a slight twist on that is that I think if we need a lot of workarounds and extra engineering work to make it work, to just kind of fix the issues that the model has, then maybe that's not a great use case. But if we can find use case that is good enough now, and maybe we can just make better when the model comes out, but it will still work with a lot of
Mm.
engineering. Maybe that's a kind of better type of use cases. And I've looked at some use case, for example, in customer service for in my current company at Moonpig, and we looked at some use cases there, and I just see that we can do it, but it will be a 6-month project with 7 people. We're going to put a lot of effort in, and like I don't know if a better model is exactly going to change it, but it just maybe I'm just going to go somewhere else and deliver a use case actually with 2 people in 3 months. So
Mm.
I, in practice, I don't find that there's any shortage of use cases. I feel like there's overwhelming number of use cases that we can do. It takes a bit of work to find it, but once you're in that lane of identifying use cases, there's too much work to do. So I
Yeah,
think
yeah. But do you then
yeah.
touch it, or do you wait for the next model before you actually do it? Right.
So I would say there's enough to deliver that actually just works.
With what we
Um,
have right now.
yeah, with what we have right now. So I find that already is the case. So I don't find myself thinking like I need to wait for the next model too often. But that was definitely the case. For example, when we were looking at some, I don't know, marketing use case and image models, or like
Mm,
video models, and I was just saying, you know what, like it's just not gonna work well. I don't want to touch it yet, and
mm,
let's maybe come back in a few months, and it is better. So
mm.
I have had examples like that. I would say probably image models come to mind more. And now once image models get better, cheaper, then yeah, let's pick this up again and try this. And I think the progress there was like quite more apparent, I would say.
There's something with work with what you have right now, right? But also to some extent, right? To have to say, okay, let's assume what we have now is what we have, and then let's see what we can do,
Mm,
right? And then let's solution design and get things moving. But also, if it solves the issue, it's a good solution, right?
mm,
That's why we have so many legacy business applications as well, still, right? Because they solve the basic issues, and we don't need to move. So this is driving so much technology in the world is based upon this idea that if it solves the problem, it solves the problem. It's a good
mm.
technology. And do you buy into that as well, right, Peter?
Yeah, totally. I think there are some use cases that are like small enough, or maybe not small. Small is not the right way of putting it, but maybe like confined enough where if you
Mm,
just resolve that issue, that's good enough, and we shouldn't worry about that again. I think that there's definitely a category of these kinds of use cases, and we've certainly got a few like that. I think there's probably another category of use cases that I think is very. We should try and find as many as possible of this type. And the type is that the better the model, the more value you get out of it. So you can imagine something like, I don't know, like search or recommendation system or something like that. There's not really an end to this problem. You can always make recommendations better. So if we can somehow plug in a better model and have now O1 preview making recommendations because it understands better and can reason about like what's the right recommendation to make. And if you're using, I don't know, GPT 3.5 before, like I can imagine you could see a world, okay, cost and latency aside, but
mm.
you could see a world where just, oh yeah, suddenly it just everything gets better just because you've changed the endpoint, API endpoint. Um, I think these are kinds of probably the best kinds of use cases to find where we can just see that we can benefit from better models. I think that's
Mm.
probably the best ones. But yeah, and there is probably some where just it just not doesn't quite work yet, and you need to do a lot of engineering around it to make it work. And that these ones I don't really like because I think you could just waste a lot of time and not like you might solve it and then like 6 months later be like, why did I waste
Yeah,
so
but
much time?
what about also depreciation of models and version control and all that? How do you solve that? Because then
Yeah,
if you have a use case working with this particular model, it doesn't necessarily work on the next model because it's prompt based, right?
yeah, this is tricky. I don't know if you've got enough practical experience yet to see the cycles. I genuinely try to just not build on all the models, and my hope is that in most cases we can just transfer and it will be fine. But I don't know yet. Maybe it's maybe it's not going to work out that way. I know that for the use case that where we moved from GPT 3.5 to GPT 4 Mini, we did need to do like a little bit of tweaking of the prompts where
Mm.
it didn't like certain words. But okay, maybe it's not a good example because the use case was small, but it took us maybe half a day and it was
Mm.
fine.
But maybe it's also why you need to go open source sometimes, right? To make sure you have control of the models you deploy, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why companies like OpenAI don't do this, but I don't see a lot of downside them open sourcing just like GPT 3.5 and just let others run
Yeah,
it. Like,
and they are
yeah,
called open AI.
yeah, and it's like it's just I don't know. Maybe I'm sure I'm not understanding something in the model, like in terms of I don't know. Maybe it's too much work. Or I don't know what, but I know they depreciate some models, and I'm sure it annoyed people, and they had like a bit of few bad headlines
Now we
from
worked with
developers.
Azure AI, right? The preview,
Mm,
and then Microsoft had all these preview models in there, and then suddenly they said, "Oh, we're moving all the preview models to another model now, a new model, and we're just moving it, and all of your the endpoints you're using will just be upgraded." I'm like, but you can't, you can't just do that. It's a different model. You can't just switch it. And then I wrote that to someone from Microsoft on LinkedIn, and he was just like, "Yeah, but hey, you said it was a preview. You probably, hopefully, you haven't built anything in production with that. Guys, you've had this preview out for a year. What? You can't just say don't build with it. So that's annoying, right? And it's not helping for operations, which I think is one of the biggest problems, right? Because we are not necessarily a problem, but we just haven't seen this technology at scale yet. We've had it for 2 years. No banks, insurance companies have worked with it before. It's not like other technologies that someone else has already done something that looks like it. So how do we even scale this? And when they're not even giving us version control, guardrails or levers, it just means I think they're making it more difficult.
Yeah, and I think open source does make sense for that kind of category of use cases. So maybe if it is a use case that you kind of just want to lock away and not look at for years, then maybe just running an open source model behind the scenes is probably the right answer. I personally don't have a lot of use case like that yet, and the downside with open source models is that then you need to also manage its actual inference, and if then you're somehow hosting it yourself, then I know there's probably a lot of overheads with that. So I don't know what overhead is worse, managing your model or like managing the transition between different models, but there's definitely, it's not cost free as well from that perspective.
No. Great discussion, Peter. Love this. So you are also you also always some of the first ones in my feed to challenge all the new models every time. It's like it takes a couple of days and then you're challenging it or writing about it or tested it or stress tested it or given a benchmark to it or something. So what model innovation? I'm gonna say model innovation because I'm also accepting sub-optimizations, right? Not just the big cycles, but which one have actually surprised you most lately? You mentioned the 1 million context window already from Google, but what else?
Yeah, I think there is probably an argument to say that a lot of the later the kind of language models, let's say last 6 months or so, they maybe were not that surprising in the sense that they were just kind of getting better and better, and you could definitely see a difference between like different Google models, and they must be doing like a lot of post training just making them better.
So you were not surprised by the Scarlett Johansson voice or the ability to make an application directly in Claude, or that didn't surprise you?
Yeah, so that's what was actually I was gonna go into that.
I was underwhelmed by at least the first one.
Well, I think that's maybe an interesting category of new capabilities that we get that are not actually directly model capabilities. They're actually capabilities built on top of it, which I think this is an area that must be so much bigger than what we're seeing now. The potential for it is so much bigger. Just the fact that, like for example, Claude's artifacts came from just a little, and I think there was like a developer at Anthropic who was just like playing around with the different features, and they were kind of building this up, and then suddenly it worked well, and they're just like, oh yeah, let's just release it. So it wasn't even like a strategic thing that they did. So how much more of that stuff that is actually possible? I think loads. So I think that category is definitely very surprising in terms of like there was NotebookML where you can upload the Google version. Get the podcast. That was pretty cool. So I think that category is surprising.
People gonna even listen to that podcast. That's my point, right? So, who's demanding that? Who said, "Oh, wish I could listen to AI podcasts," right?
But it's surprisingly good though. Like I think not that like anyone's gonna listen to someone else's, but I think the fact that you can maybe drop something in, I haven't done that much apart from just testing it, but I could definitely see be like, oh, this paper I kind of was thinking of reading it, but I don't know, I didn't get time, so you can just throw that in, and maybe while I'm doing something else I could just listen to this. I don't know.
I gave it my own article, and it was okay. for the big discussion, but it also made some really terrible mistakes of assuming, or mainly because my article is about generative AI, and for some weird reason, these generative AI models don't know about what generative AI is because they haven't been trained on it. That's always the biggest weird thing about them, right? That's a weird mind thing. So you are a generative AI, you are a large language model, right? But you don't know what a large language model is. You always refer back to old other AI stuff, right? And it's like, what is, don't you think that's funny? I think that's funny.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's actually, I don't know if people know about this.
Like asking you, what is a human, Peter? No, I don't know what a human is, but I know what an ape is. I was like, what?
Yeah. No one told me what it is.
No,
exactly. It is funny. Like whenever I tried building a few times, like a custom GPT that helps you come up with use case ideas for Gen AI, and you're right. Like it just goes back to the more regular kind of machine learning, like supervised machine learning use cases. And there was actually also there's a custom GPT that OpenAI have built that is like meant to help you identify use cases. I've never seen anyone mention it, but I just came across it. I didn't write about it because I don't think it was very good for that exact reason as well. That was just like you ask it about what are the use cases, and just like, oh yeah, you can build anomaly detection. It's like, well, okay.
Exactly. Oh, funny. Way great. Yeah. Which is good, but
Yeah. So that's something I also I've tried to do a few times to give it like some extra input and a bit of a feel for what kind of use case work well. It never quite landed as well. So that's something I'm thinking about as well. Like it's actually the bigger point apart from the issues with the models is that that's one thing that I'm still struggling with is how do I pass the intuition that I've built up over the months and months of using these models of what kind of use cases I think will work and which ones will not work. And it's actually a really tricky question because sometimes people inside Moonpig would ask me like, "Oh, what about this use case?" And quite often my answer is, "Well, I want to look at kind of what your inputs and outputs are that you're expecting, and I want to see whether inputs are like of certain structure, and do I feel like that will work or not." So, but I find it hard to explain what I'm thinking. So that's probably I could do a bit more work on is actually just try to put down on paper what is my intuition for what will work and what would not work.
But it's probably just an intuition, right? My problem is, sometimes with solutions, I have this, I feel it in my, I don't know, my back if it doesn't work, right? It's like, no, you can't do this. It won't work. This is a bad idea.
But I think if I feel like internally and maybe externally as well, I think that would be really powerful if I could somehow explain what kind of use cases to look for in a more kind of coherent way. I've definitely had many attempts at doing that, but never quite perfectly landed. I think it doesn't quite stick with people. And I don't know, maybe there's just no way to explain it apart from people just trying and getting the intuition for themselves. But a lot of the time, a little bit like actually, that's actually an interesting analogy as well, is that when you're making a point about language models not only thinking about the supervised machine learning use cases, I think it's the same for people. Actually, for a lot of people who I speak to, and we talk about use cases, what they actually talk about is I need a data analyst. And the kind of use case they come up with are things like, I've got the data here, here, and here. I need to pull it together into a dashboard. Could AI solve this? Well, I guess we could do something with AI, but that's not really the point. That's not really what you want. So
I get that all the time as well, right? Yeah. I get that. Oh, I have so much data. I need to. Can it add summarize this or something? No, this is a different thing. Sorry. This is the data alert or something. It's quite simple actually. Good that you're telling me. But I had the same thing with when I was selling RPA some years back. That people always came with say, "Oh, can we do this with a robot?" No, but good that you're saying it. That you have a big problem with this because this is easily solved by just doing this in a SQL or something like that, and then bam, everything fixed, right? But they never told me they had the problem before. Sort of RPA sort of triggered them into asking about it. And the same thing with AI now. Now AI is the thing. People are like, oh, can AI do this? Nah, but you can do it like this instead. And thank you for asking me, because now we can solve the problem you have. but Peter, you never said what really surprised you and got you
Yeah,
happy about the new model innovation, right? So I still want to
yeah,
have
yeah,
anything,
yeah,
nothing at all the last 6 months, right?
yeah.
I'm
No,
surprised you didn't
uh,
mention O1 preview, right? Everyone would say O1 preview right now.
yeah. So I think one preview, and I'll answer your question as well in terms of like what's surprising and maybe my model of the world. But on O1, it is really interesting, and I think my expectation ahead of time was that it's going to be like nothing much because the reason for it is that coming back to the scaling point, I didn't think just from reading kind of the rumors, I don't think they were scaling. I think they were basically training it in a different way. So just
Mm.
fundamentally still like GPT-4 level model that is
Yeah,
just trained with chain of
yeah.
thought, which I think is neat, but it's not a fundamentally smarter model. So I think it's still, I wouldn't challenge my idea of how well the scaling work based on O1 models. But the very interesting element there is that it's scaling of the inference compute, so how long it takes to basically come up with an answer. And it just gives us a whole new dimension of how to think about these models. And I think a lot of the time people kind of got used to the ergonomics of using GPT-4 or whatever it is to just get an answer instantly. And they're like,
Mm.
why would I want to wait for answer for longer? And it doesn't work for my chat application and so on. And I think that's just gives us a new direction to maybe evolve our intuition for what kind of use cases will work. And I haven't evolved my intuition yet. I don't have a good framework in my mind for how to use these models yet. But we'll get there, I'm sure. But
Yeah, because some
um,
of the issues are also, I think Ethan Mollick wrote that you can't decide what direction it takes. It just goes down a route,
hmm,
and then you're like, it's just hallucinations to the power, right? I think I said that on a podcast that I just recorded.
I think the thing is though is that the problem with previous models what they would never self-correct, and whenever you
Mm.
try to build this chain of thought and have some kind of self reference and trying to have self correction. I've experimented with some like prompting techniques like that, and it just like never would never work. And I think these models actually does work. So I think it does. I don't think it's true that they just kind of the hallucinations just kind of get out of hand and they just exponentially develop. It just gets worse. I think it was the case with regular models, but I think it's less of a case here. I get your point. It's not like deterministic, but it is, I think, a bit more grounded. I think it should come reasonably to similar kind of answers, logical answers, even regardless of what path it takes. But it's also early days for these models, so maybe they're not
Mm.
quite as robust. But uh, to come back to the point of like that people got used to the model, the ergonomics of GPT-4, for example, that you just get the answer instantly. They don't like that about the new models. Is that I think there's just a lot more opportunities for us to think of some use cases where this is actually important, and
Mm.
they're not live inference use cases, but I think something I'm thinking about is, for example, recommendations. A lot of the time, if you speak to data scientists, they basically say it's a solved problem. We just do, I don't know, machine learning correlations
Mm.
there, blah blah blah, and you can just kind of work it out. But I think that's kind of basically a bad answer. Not that it doesn't work. Well, although actually I would say it doesn't work. Like you go to Amazon recommendations, like I don't know, are they actually good? I don't think so. And
Mm.
people act like it's a solved problem. So, and I think there is probably some reasoning element to recommendations that I don't see that anyone's actually taken a look at properly, at least not publicly. But if you can imagine a scenario where if you look at someone's shopping basket, where I don't know, they're doing just grocery shopping, and someone is buying, I don't know, meat and I don't know, a birthday cake.
Mm.
Maybe statistically, it might be hard to work out what else they need to get, but actually, you might be like, oh, actually, they're probably having like a barbecue. So actually, we'll get you party hats, we'll get you a lighter, we'll get you coal for barbecue coal recommendation and so on. So I think there's something
Beer,
in that
Peter. Don't forget the
yeah,
beer, Peter.
exactly. But I think the framing of the model is so the framing of the problem would be so different, right? Because you
Yeah.
can ask the model, what do you think this person is trying to do? Not statistically
But you could also do that, with just 4.0 if you wanted to do that. Right?
yeah. So you can, but I do wonder. Yeah, I mean that's the tricky part to find like the difference where
Yeah.
it's actually making a difference. But I think, and maybe that's not the best example, but I think there is probably more complicated recommendations, maybe like I know financial advisor or something like that, where you do need to
Yeah.
iterate through different kind of
But this is so
steps.
funny. This is so funny, Peter, that we're sitting here. You're just starting. You're definitely ahead of the curve on AI, right? And still sitting here thinking, oh, figuring out some use
Mm,
case for this technology. Someone made a technology. Let's see what can we probably use it for, right?
mm,
It's just funny. I think that we're sitting like this, right?
yeah.
Having no idea what to use this for, but now it can do it. Hey,
Yeah,
it's
and I find a lot of the time what I do for my day-to-day job. So, and
yeah.
I basically my job is to introduce AI into the organization. Is that's what I'm always trying to work out is what are these models capable of that we're not doing yet, where we've got the highest leverage. And I'm also always speaking to the different teams in the businesses, trying to see like what do they actually do, what kind of problems do they think they
Mm,
have already, or maybe they don't realize they have, or maybe what are the new opportunities that they're not seeing yet.
yeah.
And I think I think there's a lot of the time that this kind of, especially in product building, there is I think a mantra of that don't look at technology, don't look at the solution. You need to look at the problem and kind of solve the problem, and then you should be technology agnostic, which is not like it's fine, it's perfectly reasonable. Like there are many examples of people just building some technological thing that doesn't actually solve the problem, or maybe not the best way. So I think that's, it's not unreasonable, but I think in what we are not actually saying out loud, but I think what is the case is that the only problems that you think are problems are the ones that you actually intuitively think this technology can solve. Because I don't know, no one's saying that my problem is that customers cannot fly. Because there's like, what you're gonna say,
Yeah.
right? There's no
Yeah, but I
solution,
get,
so
I
I'm not
get,
gonna
I get
list it.
that right. I get that right. I always say the other thing, right? But I'm saying in twofold, right? I always say, expect you can do almost anything today with AI, right? If you take all the models that you have, anything that's digital on a computer, just expect you can do it. You have to do that, and then ask the questions, right? And then I try to tell them what's out of the box. But it's awareness. I don't think AI is a strategy still. I think strategy has to be connected to your business challenges and your business value propositions and stuff like that. But you need to know. You need to know about
Mm.
AI.
Yeah, and so it has to be obviously grounded at some point in the real things that will actually matter.
Mm.
That's for sure. But I think I'm a bit against that just kind of customer problem first kind of approach, because I think we're just going to miss a lot of customer problems that we could actually do something about, but we don't see them as problems because we kind of constrained by the paradigm that we were in before. And I think there's maybe completely new ways of looking at things because now actually something is possible, right? So
But then you're
maybe,
also risking, you're adding a lot of risk here, Peter, right? You're basically building, you're saying, oh, we're Apple, let's build VR, right? That's what Peter would do.
yeah, and yeah, and there's definitely a balance to that. So I'm making slightly more extreme version of the point that I would do in practice. But
Mm.
I think I'm a big fan of just thinking what the technology can do and then imagining whether it actually matters. And obviously, let's ground it that it matters. But
But
I
that's
don't
also
know.
your role, right? That's also your role. You're
Yeah.
the AI evangelist, right? So someone else has all the challenges, and you have to come and tell them what's going on.
Hmm.
You're
Yeah. And then, for example, like, I don't know, take customer service or and actually no, let me switch one. So let's take like search, right? If you speak to the search team, and the kind of problems they have and the kind of problems they're focused on. They're focused on very search kind of problems where they say,
Yeah.
oh, the ranking and the inference speed, like all of that stuff, which is like that's their job. They absolutely have to focus on that. But if you're what maybe they're not thinking about is what is the way that customers could interact with search. And I could totally imagine how what we could build now is some kind of, I don't know, even voice activated way to just interact with the
But
website.
that's also why saying that we need to have better customer interaction, right, all the time, and be on the forefront. That could be a strategy, right? But not saying we need to have search or we need to have AI. You need to have another view of it, right?
Yeah, and so in this case is, I think
It's
if you're
become siloed logics, right? Siloed agendas is what prohibits transformation all the time.
Yeah, and I think that in those silos, I think when we think about customer problems, we only think in
In the
this
silo, yeah.
very kind of siloed way, right? Because it's not unreasonable. I'm not saying people shouldn't do that, but I think there's another perspective of thinking technology first just opens up more opportunities and maybe just reframes the problem. So if to that search example, so what I could imagine doing, and I haven't seen anyone do that yet, is that I could be on a clothing website, and I could look at the website and I know I'm searching for sweaters or something. And what I have in my head is that I'm quite often thinking, oh, these are, I don't know, a bit too bright. I was actually looking for something else. And then what I would do is I would translate that into a search query, or I'm going to click around the catalog and try and find something else. But what you could do is you could have just imagine like not a voice assistant, but just a website that's listening to you and say, and the customer could just say, "Oh, these are too bright," and then it just it then understands that, does another
Yeah.
search, and changes what it's showing, and then say, "Oh no, these are like a bit too goofy or something. I was actually looking for maybe not a sweater, but actually this," and then you could just completely change the interaction. And look, it might be a bad idea, I don't know, but my point is that if you're looking at what are the customer problems, I cannot imagine anyone coming up with some problem that like that idea would target. But actually, if I think with technology first, I could come up with some ideas like that don't sit in any silo, but maybe just a different way of interacting. And I
But that
think
also
that
brings
is
me back to
technology
the
first.
point. I just wrote a post about it, actually just before we got on this chat today. That the issue is not, most companies that have been disrupted, it's not been because they weren't aware of technology, but because they were too entrenched in their ecosystems, their organization, their silos, their roles and responsibilities. That they couldn't adopt it. Like the best example is the Blockbuster case. They knew about online streaming, but they couldn't do it because they had so many franchise owners who had DVDs on the shelves, right? So they didn't want to go online. End of story. It just didn't happen. So there's this. That's also why my problem is that saying that technology first, like you need to know, but that's you need. I think what we need to do is actually take a look at our decades, almost centuries old sometimes, organization standards in companies and say, how can we reimagine this? And that's the big transformation that we need to do before you can digitally transform anything, because else you just keep on working in silos, right?
Yeah, and I think that's also, in my mind, that's also an argument for having a technology first, at least part of the thinking to be technology
Because it's
first. Because
agnostic about the silos, right? Yeah.
yeah, because I can say, you know what, actually, if I was building now a customer service operation, I would do it actually quite differently to the way most of them work right now. And that would come from technology first because I know what's possible and actually what's needed to make a customer service operation work. And if you kind of go from all problems, we can kind of, I don't know, maybe help the agents there, or like, I don't know, maybe have a little bit input here. Like
Have you
you'll make progress.
have you seen the Chernobyl movie series on Netflix? Have you seen that one?
No, actually, no.
No. Oh, it's a really good one. But what's it called? The nuclear physicist. He's I can't remember his name right now, but anyway, he's the main character. But he says something to the party secretariat, the general commissioner and Gorbachev and all those guys, right? And he speaks up and he's really aggressive and everything. And then it's like, why didn't they kill me? Oh, because they realized you were you were a nerd or something. They say, but not a politician. You know, I don't say it like that. But when you come with technology, you come with this pure play. This is the problem. I could solve it with this, right? And there's no politics in that. That's why sometimes you're allowed to speak, but other times you also just put into the belly of some silo, said, "Shut the fuck up and stay there," right? So there's this dual position in it, right?
Yeah, and I think my overarching point here is that I think we just went a bit too far the other way of just saying no. The only way to think about ideas is that it has to be like a customer problem, and we have to come at it from customer problem. And I just think that's not right. I think it should be a bit of both. Like definitely shouldn't
You
be
also
like
have
technology
what I'm
first.
saying is you also have a
Yeah.
position right now where there's a hyped AI market, and you're allowed to speak your mind on how could it solve cross things, right? And then AI becomes this
Yeah.
agnostic, pure, almost naively beautiful way of just don't care about silos, right?
Yeah, and then you know what? Yeah, and then we have to ground it in something that customers care
Yeah.
about, that makes, I don't know, money, improve margin, and so on, which is like should be the reality check, obviously. But yeah, I think we just should have more freedom to dream up new ways, because, and I think that's the point of this whole maybe conversation, is that there is something different now. And I think if we do say, actually, no, we're only allowed to think of it in this kind of linear siloed way,
You're losing out.
from customer
Yeah.
problems, we just get stuck. And I think it just there's room for other ways as well.
But I don't hear you saying you don't think of, just think about this narrowing customer problem. I hear you say just narrow, siloed agendas, because customer problem is still, in the end, the holistic reason the company exists, right? That's everything we do.
Yeah, it's just I think maybe my biggest problem with the customer problem idea is that I think we're slightly lying to ourselves when we think about customer problems, because the types of problems that we list are constrained by the our capabilities, by our
And
silos.
that's a different thing, right? Because we need to know the known knowns and the unknown known knowns, and the known unknowns and all those, right? You need to have that as part of your strategy as well. How can we uncover that? But the problem must always be the customers, right?
Yeah. It's just I think customers have way more problems maybe than we realize, and we just
And that they realize as well, right?
yeah, that they realize. And like certainly, like, take Moonpig as a business. We definitely do have some direct customer problems that we solve about, like we remind customers when the anniversary is coming up and so on. Like that is a customer problem. But there's a big part of it that is just delightful, right? It's just like we have good designs, and we have, I don't know, nice stickers, and and I don't know, is that a customer problem, that a customer like doesn't have that kind of car? I don't know. That's part of it. Is just it is a nice product, and I think many, and maybe it's pleasant to use, and people just, I know, people want to use it, and I think that's a lot of our, I know, economy spending is like that, right? Where it's just it is, there is some, maybe not the problem as such, but people like it. It's more delightful, and it's more, like, I know, more ergonomic, and there's less friction, and there's a, it's not, it's kind of slightly, I think, maybe constraining to put it as here's a problem we have to solve. No, it's just like, let's just make it better. People like it more, and hopefully they'll stay as customers.
Peter, I asked you about what has surprised you most. I also want to ask you what you feel is overhyped, and are we seeing GPT-5 soon?
Yeah, no, I don't think of it. I mean, the problem with idea of hype and overhype I is kind of what your expectations are, and I find that whenever you kind of speak to people or read what people write, is that they have wildly different expectations. And sometimes I know, listen to, I don't know, people who are kind of maybe technical people in the AI industry, maybe in academia, and they would like criticize LLMs and say, oh, they have all of these issues, they don't like reason, they don't do this, they don't do that. And they basically, I think the overarching point is, oh, there's no way to build AGI. And that's the problem with them, that they want to build AGI, and that's not that. But I personally don't care about that. I have no interest in not. I mean, obviously, I'm interested if AGI gets built, but that's not why I'm interested in this. Like, I'm not. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
just saying.
I get your point. So you have those, and that call them the whataboutisms to some extent, right? Because they always go what about, what about, what about, and then you have the other side, Sam Altman's going like, oh, we need AGI in the more tomorrow, and it's just frictionless, saying statements out in the air, right? To some extent, so
Yeah,
they're sort of arguing with each other, and then the rest of us are in the middle, being like, hey, well, I just want to work with it.
yeah, and I think in terms of like hype. So if someone's expectations are that GPT-5 will come out and it will be like we'll be maybe not quite AGI, but we could be almost there,
Mm.
and then they'll try it and they'll still make mistakes and it'll still be like a little bit, they maybe like a bit wobbly in places and be like, oh yeah, that's not AGI. But I don't know. I don't mind that. I don't particularly expect AGI like anytime soon. I think once you actually start using these models a lot and try and build something with it, you just kind of see how dumb they are quite often and
Mm.
how many inconsistencies there are and so on. And I hope that gets better, but I'm under no illusions that AGI is around the corner. So in my mind, in terms of like what's overhyped, uh, it's a little bit like depending on the person. I think some people definitely overhyping this, but in my mind, I just hope they get like quite a bit better and we see the direction of development,
Mm.
and that will be absolutely fine for me. And
Yeah.
hopefully they'll be just a lot smarter, more consistent. You can ask them more stuff. You can just give them more kind of
You know
responsibility,
what?
give them better
You know
use
what?
cases.
You know what? This your reply just reminds me of the way in quantum mechanics there was all this what is actually going on the below subparticle level and all that, right? And then still some people are still discussing that. There's a lot of schools in that, right? But
Mm.
most physicists just like shut up and calculate. That's actually a phrase in quantum physics, like shut up and calculate. We don't want to discuss what's going on there. We just know how it works and let's build things with it, right? And
Yeah.
and and we're sort of building the same here in AGI or in AI, not AGI. Sorry, now I said that terrible word. But you have this, oh, what about AGI discussion, right? Oh, it doesn't matter. Shut up and calculate. Just build stuff,
Yeah.
right? And that's where you fall in that last bucket, don't you,
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, exactly. I'm much more interested in what kind of new stuff we can build, like what
Yeah.
what is now possible, and I think that's basically all I care about. And then I think it will be kind of overhyped for me if I realize like 6 months later, actually we can't build anything new. It's all kind of the same kind of thing. I think that would be quite disappointing. So that would make it overhyped in my eyes, but I kind of hope that's really not the case. In terms of like what's really overhyped, I don't know. It's really hard to know whether things are
Mm.
overhyped or underhyped.
Because it's so early still,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. You
yeah,
don't dare say anything.
yeah. So, but you get like little hype spikes when someone
Mm.
releases a new model and they say, "Oh, like that's amazing." And we had some of these moments. I don't know what comes to mind is I think was it like Snowflake, Databricks released some models around the same time. They were like their own models that they built, and I remember at the time it was like people. I even heard some people say, "Well, they build GPT-4 level models, so why do we need GPT-4? It's all over for
Mm.
OpenAI and so on." You tried these models, like I appreciate they built them and they tried something, but they're not good models. Like
Like Grok?
it's yeah, the latest Grok is fine, but I mean, doesn't really add anything to the industry. But they were open
No.
source models. It's a new type of model. I'm sure I'm missing something. There's some use for it, but that we do have these moments when it just like gets overhyped in the
But this
moment,
this
and
always
then
surprises me, right? That there's just billions and billions and billions of dollars being thrown in the market at different vendors, different players, right? Different competitors in the market all the time, and everyone is just building GPT-4 size models. It's like this, it's like they can't do anything else than what the others did.
yeah, but I think that it does come back to the point of how much compute is available to,
yeah.
to these companies, and the reality is that like for example Grok 2 was came out recently, and the reason at least one of the key reasons why it's not better than others is because they were compute constrained and they basically trained it on the similar amount of compute that GPT-4 was trained in back in like
Mm.
end of 2022. So that's a kind of there's just what you kind of have to do, and that's it.
Mm.
So, and now there are. I wrote something about this recently, where just how much more compute OpenAI is getting access to just in the
Mm.
coming kind of months and years, and I think it was something like 10 times more, I think, in the next year or so.
Mm.
So,
But Meta also
and
bought like 10,000 GPUs or something like that, right, last year.
no, they actually have, yeah, Meta has huge numbers of
Yeah.
GPUs. So,
Yeah.
yeah, they're like, I think they're going to have like 400,000 at some point. And yeah, we're getting into crazy
Yeah.
numbers. And I think that
Yeah.
that's the point there, is that if you look at the models that were trained so far, they were trained on, let's say, like 30,000 maybe H100s. And then what you will get clusters of, and like multiple clusters of 100,000 of GB200. So
Mm.
if you go to H100 to GB 200, they're like, at least NVIDIA says they're 4 times better, 4 times more
Yeah.
powerful for training. So you kind of get from 30,000 to 100,000 to
Yeah. Yeah.
100,000, and then multiply that by four. So you
By four.
effectively, like, from 25,000 or 30,000 to like 400,000. That's your increase.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. So I think that we've got a lot uh, to look forward to. I think in terms of like what's overhyped, I don't really want to say that, and I don't really think it's overhyped. But one area like I slightly worry about is actually open source. That
Mm.
I think a lot of people uh, say like, oh, open source challenging everything, so amazing and so on. But like in reality, you look at what we have as open source is very good meta models, and there are some from Mistral, and there are like a few from Chinese labs. But the overarching point there is that we are the kind of at the mercy of just a few companies just doing that.
Mm.
And what if Meta decides not to invest more money in this, or not to open
Mm.
source it, or just kind of, I don't know, somehow they lose interest? Then what? Like,
Mm.
what is the actual open source play? Like that, it's not maybe. I'm not saying it's overhyped, but it's slightly. I'm a bit worried that we might lose that strand. And I think people, just because they want to believe that open source is there and competing, we don't see the fragility of that competition. That we lose a couple of
Mm.
models, we don't have anything.
Usually, it also open source also comes out as at strength when everything is fully commoditized. Maybe we're not just there yet. All right. Maybe we're not quite there. It
Maybe.
feels like that sometimes. That some things look like plateau, like everything's GPT-4, but maybe it's just not a plateau really yet. That may be what you're saying.
Mm,
We're above the 1 hour mark. I love this conversation, Peter.
mm,
I just want to ask you. I have actually two questions more, right?
mm,
That I really want you to answer, right? So everyone keeps commenting that you need, loads of data to do, AI or generative AI. But is that really true in generative
mm.
AI? I think we spoke about this also last time we spoke. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think it's it's definitely one of those things that we talked about in this conversation, is that people have the certain mindset from the
mm,
previous paradigm, and the mindset was that we need to have as much data as possible. That's what businesses were told, right? You need to have as much
mm,
data as possible, then you can train your algorithms and you can
yeah.
solve all your problems. And that still applies to like certain class of use cases, but with gen AI kind of use cases, it's actually really not helpful to have that much data. So, for example, if you have a use case that we want to build, I don't know, customer service chatbot, and then you say, okay, here 10 million previous conversations. I I'm not sure what I'm going to do with those 10 million conversations, because I can't put them in the context window and say like,
No. Only
here
if you use
this
Google.
model. But even so, like, it's not really gonna work. It's gonna get
No.
confused, right? Because
Yeah.
of the like different circumstances, customer data. Like, it's not gonna work. So what we actually need is, we need an interim step in there, and I think right now it's just done by humans. Is we need to
Mm,
have a distilled set of instructions that are kind of encompass the data that we can give to the model. So in customer service example, it could be that we just need to write out all of the different processes that we have, all of the different, I don't know, what the kind of information, what do you need to know before you can give a refund to a customer, right?
Mm.
You cannot just expect the model to guess what your process is, right? You just need to, and you cannot
Yeah.
expect the model to just infer that from millions of
So
conversations. So
what
you
you're
actually,
saying is basically that we need to rely on the pre-training in the models, right?
well, pre-training is like the initial part of it, but the way you ground it in your
That's
company's
prompt engineering. Yeah.
information is, well, I would say is a kind of not just prompt, but it's actually the knowledge base that you give it. And
Mm.
what I think is the missing part for a lot of use cases is that that knowledge part is not there, and not because someone is, I don't know, didn't do their job or something, but there was never need to write it down like that.
Mm.
Like when I looked, for example, at our customer service like training documentation and knowledge base, it was written in a way that is suitable for humans. So they could have like a table of this is our policy for making refunds, and here's just like a grid. But if I give this to a model, it would have no clue
Mm.
what is meant to do. I actually need to write out a few page document which explains the context of this. When do you do this? What are the
Maybe you
circumstances
should
when you
try to
don't do
give it to
this?
O1, Peter. Maybe it will reason it.
And well, that's actually an interesting use case that I think OpenAI mentioned was that that maybe or one could be used for that, where we
Mm.
do give it conversations and it infers what the process is that would
Mm.
actually like write down the process that comes from that conversation. I haven't tried it yet, so I can't say whether it works or not, but it maybe. But I think to coming back to your original question is that giving it a lot of data is really completely pointless. There's not much that the model can do with it. There is a necessary interim step where we need to just write down exactly what the model should be using to make, I don't know, decisions and
Yeah.
or speak to customers and so on. Which
But that's also
which
my
is
point, right? Saying,
yeah.
it's pre-trained, so it has a lot of knowledge already, but
Mm,
we need to use our prompt or our basing in instructions to sort of
yeah,
narrow it down on what
yeah,
it should actually activate in its pre-training.
yeah.
Uh,
Exactly. Yeah, and it could be knowledge base, could be a prompt. Yeah. So in writing prompts, quite often, the even if you don't have like complicated use cases, the key thing about prompt engineering and why I think it will be there at some level with us for a long time is that you need to write down what is important to you. How do you, when you see this kind of I don't know, field, how do you
mm,
interpret it? What's a combination of those fields and so on? So but it's not something that you can just expect a model to guess. Even like GPT-5, GPT-6 level model, I just can't imagine how it could know, because
mm,
it comes from our expertise, because we do this job and we know what's
yeah.
important for us. So I think that's the key thing of we have to change the way we think about this from just like collect all data and it just kind of amass as much as you can. No, now you actually need to distill and have really high quality, very kind of LLM friendly set of instructions.
Great answer, Peter. And then, how do you think that generative AI will look in 2024, 2025?
Yeah. We It's a really, really important like 6 to 8 months for the industry. And what I mean by that is that we had this idea that scaling works, and that
Mm,
and then we talked about that it's all
yeah.
of the kind of models like about GPT-4 level. So that's the big test now. So I think we should have next, maybe like maybe end of this year, but mostly like Q1 next year, is that we should see the next generation of models. So I
Mm,
think we should see new GPT model that is actually scaled. We should see probably um, uh, maybe Grok model, which I don't know how to think about it, but we should see new Meta model, we should see a new Google
mm.
model, new Anthropic models, maybe. So that's the kind of next kind of 8 months or so, I think. And then that's the biggest test, I think, for the scaling hypothesis that we had so far. That actually, how much better do these models get? So
Mm.
that, and I think it will be extremely exciting from that perspective. And then, or it could be extremely disappointing if actually the scaling doesn't really
And
work
if it's
at that
disappointing,
level.
then then it became a bubble, right? But if it's not disappointing, then
Yeah,
it's not a bubble.
exactly. Yeah, and I think like sometimes like people say, yeah, about bubble, is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? Well, I think the easy answer would be exactly what you said. Is that, yeah, if GPT-5 is a flop, then yeah, I think like we are probably
Yeah.
all valuations going to
I
crash.
say that as well, right? I don't think it's a bubble. If technology keeps moving, 10x and just keeps on moving, it's not a bubble. But if
Mm,
it doesn't move that fast and we don't catch up to it, then we have a bubble situation, right?
mm,
Or else,
yeah.
but the other way, we just have something that just keeps inflating
Mm. And
endlessly, right?
on the bubble, I think um, something I was meant to write about, and maybe I will at some point, is that I think we, when we think about the industry, I think we kind of try to take positions of many companies, almost like, well, but why do I care that it's a bubble and investors gonna lose a lot of money because Nvidia stock are gonna crash or something? I don't care about that. Like
Mm.
it's their money, but I just want good stuff. So if they're gonna pump the money and give money to Nvidia and build bigger models and try and make it better, even if it's completely overvalued and overhyped, fine by me. Just give me good stuff at low price. I'm okay
Yeah,
with that.
yeah. But the issue is
Mm.
the investors get cold feet, right? Then it will stop a little bit. No more compute power. That's also why I always say, if you, I said that also in my last episode, that if we stop, if everyone gets fired, right, because of AI, then there's no one to buy from it, and then there's no investors, and then end of story, right?
Mm.
So we need to find
Mm.
something humans can do so we can keep buying models.
Yeah, yeah, but still, like I think even if it's a bubble, I don't really care. Just
No,
if they want to throw money in, good. I'm happy. Yeah.
shut up and calculate, right, Peter?
Exactly, exactly.
So, Peter, this actually brings me to the final question. I think this is an absolutely brilliant conversation. Also, one of the longer ones I've had, but I've enjoyed every second of it. So, thank you very much for that. And I hope you're ready for the last question of the podcast, which is always at the end of the podcast, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So, Peter, what is the only constant?
So the thing that I worry about a little bit is that we, especially I think in Europe, because it's a rich region and a little bit risk averse region, that we worry too much about the potential downsides, about the potential change, about investments we need to make, and we get stuck because we're rich and comfortable, and we just say, you know what, that's good enough. And we by the way completely ignored the fact that I know at least in the UK where I'm based is public services are creaking. There's so many people who don't have good lives, who are very low incomes. Inflation is eating away their savings or whatever it might be. And yeah, we have a lot of problems, but we do not appreciate how much extra we can get from just really embracing technologies like hopefully like the AI wave we are talking about. So to answer your question, I think the only constant has to be development and acceleration of development, and just us embracing the technological developments that we've got. And I really worry that we're just gonna try and push away against this constant because we're just rich and comfortable and we're happy and we're so much. We just try to have high regulations and we say let's just pause everything and wait and see. And I just really worry that we're gonna wake up one day and be like, oh, why? I guess it happens already, right? There are barely any AI companies in Europe. If you look at like biggest data centers being built, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but I haven't seen any in Europe. It's all in the US and I don't know, in Asia, maybe in Middle East. Um, and that that worries me that we are not actually embracing this quite obvious constant. And the reality is that the only way how we can, I know, make our public services better, lift people out of poverty, is technological development. There's nothing else. We don't have anything else. We are kind of one trick pony in that way as a humanity. We can only make things work better, quicker, cheaper, be more productive, and that's how we get better. So that's also that's a big motivating factor for when I think about how do we build new things, how do we come up with new ideas. That is like, we just need to get wealthier, we need to be more productive, and I just hope it keeps going. But I slightly worry about that, especially in Europe.
That's a really great answer, Peter. Thank you for that. And it also made me think about the podcast is called The Only Constant. So I obviously looked up a little bit on what Heraclitus actually means by that, because he says the only constant is change. And he also says that it also means that some things have to change to remain the same, like the river has to change to remain a river, right? And I think that sort of actually encapsulates what you just said. If we want to stay rich and stay Europe, we have to change, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Thank you so much for being on The Only Constant, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, it's been great.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.